Hello, and welcome back to American Motherhood, where we explore how society and politics shape the American motherhood experience. I'm Bethany, a mom of 2 young girls here in Central Ohio, and today we're getting ready for the state primaries on Tuesday, May 5th. I've invited a familiar voice in front of the show to help us prepare. Among many other things, Kelley Stocker is a high school government teacher, and we're asking her, how do primaries work in Ohio, who's on the ballot, and what do we need to know about Ohio state government? So grab your coffee or drink of choice. This is a quick but thorough walkthrough of Ohio's 2026 elections, so that we, as busy moms, can show up with informed and confident votes. Okay, let's dive in. Last heard from Kelley in 2025. We knew her as candidate for Westerville City Council, and now I'm thrilled to introduce you as Westerville's Vice Mayor. Congratulations again, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I've asked you for a quick civic refresher, but one thing that I did remember are the 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Can we start there at a high level?
Yeah, so the main purpose of the legislative branch is to legislate or to make our laws. The executive branch executes those laws and carries them out. And then the judicial branch is responsible for interpreting those laws and ensuring that our laws don't violate the Constitution. That's sort of the basics. And that's the same at the federal level or at the state level in terms of how each one functions.
Mm-hmm. And so our elections this fall encompass all 3 branches of government, as we'll dig into in a little bit. There's often confusion between the Ohio House of Representatives, the Ohio Senate, and the U.S. Congress. So can you break it down for us?
Yeah, it can be really confusing. You basically need to keep track of 5 people. So at the federal level, we all have 2 U.S. senators, and they represent the whole state in the U.S. Senate. And then we have 1 representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. So they only represent districts. So that's the first district that you need to be aware of. Then when you get to the state level, both senators and House reps at the state level are in districts. So you'll need to identify your Ohio state senator and what district you're in for that, and then your Ohio state representative and what district they're in. So you have 5 people representing you between the U.S. Congress and the state house. And then you have 3 districts that you need to identify.
Okay, so when somebody says U.S. Congress, that is our U.S. Senator and our U.S. House of Representative. And then when we say State House, that encompasses our Ohio House of Representatives and our Ohio Senators.
Right. So you need to pay attention to the titles. If you see the words United States, if you see the word Congress, you're talking about the federal level. If you see State House, Ohio, or the Ohio General Assembly is what our legislative body is called in Ohio, those are your state level. And it's really important to identify those because different levels of government and representatives will do different things for us. And so if we're trying to get a hold of them to let them know what we think about an issue or to help us solve a problem that we see, we want to make sure that we're contacting the appropriate level of government for that to be effective.
Mm-hmm. What types of decisions are made at the state level versus the federal level? And where should our voters focus if they care about issues like education, childcare, community safety, those high values for families?
It's interesting. I'll give a quick civics lesson on the type of government that we have. We have a federal style government, federalism, meaning that power is both shared and divided between a federal government and a state government. And we have a specific type of federalism called cooperative federalism, or what is nicknamed marble cake federalism. So there is not necessarily a very clear division between what the federal government does and what the state does. That's why it's called marble cake, because marble cake is kind of swirled all in. That's opposed to dual federalism that has very clearly defined layers. That changed around the New Deal era when the federal government started taking on a lot more to help respond to the Great Depression. And so now we have cooperative federalism, and it can be harder to define who does what. Mm-hmm. So what you mentioned, things like childcare, public safety, education, those are what we refer to as police powers, which is a little misleading because we hear police powers and we just think law enforcement, but it really is all encompassing when it comes to essentially taking care of the well-being of our state. Those are reserved powers for the state. And so typically you would want to contact your state representatives if you see bills coming through, or you want to see more bills coming through to assist with funding or something like that. However, this is the cooperative federalism piece. The states do get a lot of funding through grants from the federal government for programs like that. So not just understanding what level of government does what in terms of issues, but also understanding the role that each level of government plays. So you could call your U.S. senator or representative and say, I would love to see some funding for states for childcare in the next spending bill or something like that. That would also be appropriate, even though the federal government isn't necessarily passing laws for individual states about those things. They can provide funding for them. So it's a lot to keep.
Yes, definitely. So can you quickly remind us how our legislators propose and enact new legislation?
I could do my rendition of Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. That's my favorite thing to do in my class every year. But the gist of it is, an idea is proposed. That idea can come from a lot of places. It could come from lawmakers themselves. It could come from voters. Very often it comes from lobbyists and interest groups. And so an idea for a law is born. And the first place that it goes is a committee. So it's assigned to a committee based on the particular topic that it deals with. It then gets kind of hashed out there in committee in a form that the committee feels might be palatable to the entire body, whatever body it's in, whether it's the House or the Senate. Then it would need to get voted out of committee. It would go to the full floor for a vote, and then it would need to go to the other house. So if it originated in the Senate, it would get voted on the floor of the Senate. It would then get kicked over to the House. The House would vote on it. It would go to get signed or vetoed, potentially. Now, it can get a little more complicated than that. The House could make changes to it. And if they do make changes to it, it would have to go back to the Senate because it has to be voted out of both houses in the same form. Then it goes to the executive, whether we're talking about the governor or the president, to get signed into law.
So does it start in either the House or the Senate based on who's proposing the bill, or how does that get assigned?
Most bills can start in either house. Unless it's a spending bill, then it has to start in the House of Representatives. The House is considered the representatives that are closest to the people for a lot of reasons that I would love to dive into, but it would take a while. And so it was thought that, the House that is closest to the people should be where, things that have to do with spending the people's money starts. And so, but most bills can start in either house. So it just has to do with the lawmaker that is sponsoring or co-sponsoring the bill, what house they're in, who comes up with the idea or who takes the idea and runs with it.
I would also love to dive into those roles. So at the state level, we have 99 Ohio House representatives, and they serve 2-year terms. And each seat is up for election every 2 years, correct?
Yes.
And so obviously our vote is powerful in a way that we can hold them accountable to what they have done in the past 2 years, assuming they're running again. Are these seats term limited?
Technically, yes. So in Ohio, I believe in 1992, we put some form of term limits on our elected legislators. So in the Senate, well, in both houses, a lawmaker can serve up to 8 consecutive years. So that word consecutive is really important because essentially what it means is once they've served those 8 years, they can hop over to the other house. They can also take, I think it's a 2-year break if they were to serve those back to back 8 years in each house. I believe it's a 2-year break, and then they can go back to their previous house that they started in and serve again. And so we kind of have term limits, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
Restricting them to consecutive years versus lifetime limits. So the Ohio Senate, their terms are 4 years, so they only need to get reelected twice to get to that 8. The Ohio House is 2-year terms. And so they can also only serve 8, but they have to run every 2 years and would have to get elected 4 times to get to that 8 years.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Okay, so yes, so we are voting for our Ohio House of Representatives every 2 years. And why are they considered to be closer to the voters?
Yeah, so, and this is the same for our federal and for our state, but there are some unique qualities of the House of Representatives. They're considered the lower house, not because they're not as important or as powerful as the Senate, but because they are closer to the people. The House of Representatives was intended to be like the people's house. It was intended to be more reflective of the popular will. And so they get elected every 2 years. And what that means is they're essentially perpetually campaigning. And so they have to be responsive to the people that they represent because they want to get reelected. That was by design. That's not, sometimes we think of like, oh, that's awful. They shouldn't be perpetually campaigning. But it was a way to balance popular will with institutional knowledge, which is where the Senate comes in. So the Senate at the federal level, they serve 6 years. At the state level, it's 4. But either way, it's longer than the House terms. And that is so that you get typically more experienced politicians. You get politicians that are able to be a little bit more deliberative and slower and not necessarily so responsive to the popular will. So the Senate was intended to be a little more insulated from the popular will and be a little bit more deliberative and be able to make decisions based on experience and what they thought was best for the country, even if it wasn't necessarily the popular decision in that moment. So we have both, right? And that was one of the big debates at the Constitutional Convention was fear of popular will versus, hey, we just fought this Revolutionary War so that we could have a say in our government. And so the bicameral Congress having the 2 houses was a way to balance that. The other reason the House of Representatives is considered closer to the people is because they do represent less people. So you mentioned we have 33 Senate districts in Ohio and 99 House districts. And so Senate districts are bigger, and that's true at the federal level as well. Our federal senators represent the whole state, whereas House reps represent a particular district. And so they represent less people in the House, and so they're more accessible. They are literally closer, to the people that they represent. It can be easier to get a hold of them because they don't have as many people calling them. And so those are just some of the reasons why it's considered the house that is going to be more responsive to the people.
Mm-hmm. Super helpful. I'm going to try to play that back. At the state level, Ohio has 99 state representatives and 33 state senators. State representatives serve 2-year terms, so all 99 seats are up for election. State senators serve staggered 4-year terms, so about half of those seats are on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the federal level, Ohio has 15 members in the U.S. House of Representatives, and all 15 seats are up for election this year, along with one of Ohio's 2 U.S. Senate seats. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we also will be electing our executive branch officials who serve 4-year terms. So that includes the governor and lieutenant governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, auditor of state, and treasurer of state. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, our judicial branch, which is one that I don't think of. And it's the one that I definitely want to learn more about. So we have our Ohio Supreme Court, Ohio Court of Appeals, which is by district. And then we have our common pleas courts, which are at the county level. Mm-hmm. Okay, I should probably ask, what else should we know?
Just a couple of quick things to note. A big difference is that we elect a lot more people in Ohio than we do at the federal level. So at the federal level, your attorney general, your secretary of state, treasurer, those are all positions that are appointed by the president. They're in the president's cabinet. They help advise the president. So they're appointed and then they're confirmed by the Senate. Other than, indirectly by electing the president, we don't have a voice in who serves as those roles. Whereas in Ohio, we elect those positions. Those are independently elected positions. They will still help the governor execute laws, but they are independently elected. And then the same is true for the judicial branch at the federal level. There's a reason why we probably don't think as much about the judicial branch in Ohio. And it's because at the federal level, we have no direct voice in our judicial branch. And that, again, was by design. The judicial branch was thought to be the branch of government that would be most removed from the people. And they were really the branch that was going to operate behind the scenes, right? They were going to be doing like the boring work. I put the word boring in quotes. It's not boring now, but going through and interpreting the laws. They were not thought to be a branch that was going to have a huge impact on the people. They were to be insulated from popular opinion. They were, they have life tenure at the federal level so that they are able to make decisions based on their best judgment rather than getting reelected. They don't have to fear retaliation from other elected officials like the president because they have life tenure. And so that's something that is very different at the state level. We do get to elect our judicial branch electeds at the state level. But it is consistently the branch that I hear voters in Ohio talk the most about in terms of feeling like they don't know who these people are or what's going on.
For judicial candidates, do they run with a party or do they run nonpartisan?
Well, we changed that in 2021, that party affiliates are next to most judicial candidates on the ballot now, including the race for Ohio Supreme Court. So that was a more recent change. They didn't used to have party affiliation, and now they do. But parties can always endorse whoever they want, even if it's a nonpartisan race. But yeah, they do have party affiliates now.
That is very interesting. Really, obviously all of these things could be different episodes, but that was super helpful as we start to prepare for the primaries. Ohio primaries are on Tuesday, May 5th. We have an open primary system. How does that work?
Open primaries mean that anybody from any party can vote in either primary. So primaries are a function of political parties. They're not a part of our regular general election voting. That's why you don't see primaries for like independent candidates. So Democrats put on the Democratic primary voting or head it up, and Republicans, head up their Republican primary. And so you do have to choose. You can't vote in both of them. So primaries are really party candidate against party candidate. And so when you go in, you say, I want a Republican ballot or I want a Democratic ballot. But it doesn't matter if you're registered with that party or not. Now, it's always been my understanding that Ohio is actually a mixed primary system where we are open, but once you vote in that party's primary, you're automatically registered with that party. And then A closed primary would be the other option, and that means that you have to be registered with that party to vote in their primary. So if you want to vote in the Republican primary, you have to be a registered Republican to do that. And so could I say, if I'm a Democrat and I want to weigh in on the Republican side, could I do that? Technically, yeah, I could. Maybe I think one candidate would be easier to beat than another. Yeah, I could do that. Are there any repercussions? No. I mean, you really shouldn't do that, but there aren't any legal repercussions. You can still vote for whoever you want to vote for in the general election. And with the mixed primary that we have in Ohio, the only downfall is maybe I don't want to be identified as a Republican. Maybe I have a political career or a career in journalism or law or something where I wouldn't want that party affiliation to pop up because that is public information. So your general election voting is private. Nobody can look up they can look up if you voted, but not who you voted for. Your primary is not private.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look somebody's voting history and see how many times have they voted for Democrats, how many times have they voted for Republicans, and there might be, a career or an interest that you have in your life where you wouldn't want that to be public information that you voted for one party over another. So that's the only thing that you kind of have to be careful about, but the typical person doesn't care about that. So
Right.
there aren't really any repercussions for them crossing the aisle and voting in another primary.
Okay, so when we're talking about primaries, the reality is state level primaries are often where elections are actually decided because those are the candidates that we're bringing forward for the rest of our constituents to vote on. And so it's really important to be paying attention at this time of year, but that's not how society works, right? We get sucked into the general election and those big names. And for that reason, also, state races are often less contested, but in many districts, the primary effectively decides the winner because we have, again, in our society, I think a lot of people who identify themselves as one party or the other, and then they're automatically going to vote for that party candidate, which is one reason why I want to bring forward our candidates in this way. I feel really passionate that we actually get to know our candidates and we look beyond the Republican label or the Democrat label or independent label, right? Let's actually get to know their personal values and how that will impact their votes and their decisions. I think we may be a long way from that, but I think that is, what we'd like to see happen more often. Okay, what else would be important to note?
Well, I thought you brought up a good point about getting to know our candidates, especially our state candidates, because they are closer to us than our federal candidates. And there has been a push in our state to attach party labels to more candidates. We just talked about the change with judicial candidates in the last few years. And there's a push currently to require school board and city council local races to attach party affiliation. And the argument in favor of that is that local candidates, judicial candidates, they're being supported by parties. And so it's a push to be more transparent and say, well, if you're being endorsed by a party and you're being supported by a party and that party is working for you, canvassing for you or whatever, then your voters deserve to know that you're attached to that party.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that argument. I don't think that that's an invalid argument. However, what you just said about looking past party labels, and I think this is particularly true in Ohio, I think it would actually be really interesting to go the other way and remove party labels. Don't let people fall back on, well, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, and therefore I am only ever going to vote for somebody who's from that party, right? Or I have a certain idea about what this party is and that I would never vote for somebody from that party. And so I'm not even going to give you the time of day. It would force us to listen to our candidates and get to know our candidates, and hopefully, consequently, hold them accountable for the things that they tell us when they're campaigning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be much more interesting to actually go the other way and to remove partisanship and force all of us to get to know these people that are running. So I
Yes.
don't, like you said, we're a long way off from that probably, and it seems like we're moving in the wrong direction for that. But I think it would be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's a great point. Who would we need to talk to express our opinions about that? Is that Secretary of State? Is that our all state representatives?
That would be our lawmakers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be our state lawmakers.
Mm-hmm.
So first it would be calling them to express that we are against the immediate push to put party labels on local candidates, and then to continue to push from there. So, yes, individuals could call their lawmakers, but groups are really much more effective. We've seen groups come together around a lot of different issues in Ohio. We are a very active state, which I love. We've been successful at ballot issues when, on the ballot when our lawmakers aren't listening to us, although that has become harder in recent years.
Yeah.
But if that was something that people really were interested in and wanted to see, the move would probably be to form a group. Start with these groups that already exist,
Mm-hmm.
and see if you can build a coalition of these groups. And then you take the power of that collective voice to the lawmakers and say, this is what we want. That's really how things get moving in Ohio.
Yes, that's a really great reminder. And also to bookend our conversation from earlier, it is our lawmakers who propose legislation. It is our executive branch of government who then executes on those laws. Okay, so just a couple other logistical things I want to talk about when it comes to primaries. What is a provisional ballot?
If you walk in on election day and for some reason you're told you can't vote, maybe they can't find your registration. Maybe you don't have an ID that matches your correct address, or whatever the case might be. If you're told that you can't vote, but you registered, your vote's not going to count if you didn't register, even if you cast a provisional ballot. But if I am eligible to vote, and somebody for some reason is telling you that you can't, then you request to cast a provisional ballot. Again, it doesn't mean that if you're an ineligible voter that your vote's going to count. Casting a provisional ballot just means that we will work to verify your eligibility. And if we can verify your eligibility, then your vote will count.
Mm-hmm. Important note following that is that we in Ohio have until April 6th to register to vote in the primaries. And so even if you have voted every year and you know that you've been registered, it's a good idea to double check that.
Yeah. And if you just Google verify my voter registration in Ohio, the site will come up. Election laws and the way that we kind of clean up our voter rolls changes all the time. And I am a lifelong voter. I tell people it's my favorite thing to do. It's my pastime, my favorite hobby. I vote in everything. And I check my registration probably twice a year, ahead of May and ahead of November, pretty much every year. Because you don't want to get kicked off for whatever reason and not know.
Mm-hmm. And it has been in the news a lot. So it is really important to do that this year, especially. Okay. So what are a few simple things moms can do now to feel prepared for the primary?
So get your information. You did a great job at laying out who we have on the ballot this year. Make sure that you know who you are voting for and why.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the legwork that I find that overwhelms people the most. I have put together for my students a simple worksheet where they look that information up. If I were a voter based on where I live, what would be my district? Who would be my representatives? When are these people up for reelection? I'm happy to share that. Doing that legwork far ahead of an election, I think can really help mitigate that, because voting often, I think, seems to be an afterthought. It's like, oh no, there's an election in 2 days.
Yeah.
Who am I voting for? What am I doing? And I have to remind myself that everybody is not me. I'm a government teacher. I have a government heart, and that's my world. And for a lot of people, especially very busy moms, this is not a judgment whatsoever. Very busy moms, it's like, well, I'm going to vote, but I don't have the time to do this or that. So do it ahead of time. And that way, when election day comes up, you don't have to panic.
Mm-hmm.
I always find that information helps me not feel so overwhelmed. When there are so many candidates on the ballot and so many opportunities to vote, when you start thinking about local elections and statewide elections, it can be, again, especially if you're waiting to the last minute, it can be like, well, I don't have time to research 25 different candidates, right? And so just starting one at a time. Maybe today I'm going to look up information on the people who are running for Secretary of State. And instead of thinking, oh, I need to sit down and dedicate 2 or 3 hours to researching all these candidates, just look up a couple candidates here and there when your kids are playing at the playground and you're sitting on the bench. That's when having your cheat sheet would be helpful too. And just kind of doing it piecemeal instead of trying to take it all on at once, because it is a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good reminder too, if you do feel like, oh, I didn't do enough research on these candidates, especially in the primaries, to know who you would want to represent you. You can go in knowing that you feel passionate about even one individual, and you can make a difference in that way as well. And then I think this is a good way to close it out. One clear step that everyone can take is to look up their sample ballot. That is a great tool to utilize. Obviously, start with what is on your ballot, and that's all that you have to focus on. Okay. Anything else?
My kid just got home, so
good timing.
It's going to be such a good timing, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kelley, for all of the insight, for taking us back to our high school government class. This is super helpful.
Thank you so much.